Hello, everyone. Sorry about canceling class today. It seemed to make sense given the wacky weather we were having. As it turned out, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon now. Sun is shining. Everything is fine. But I don't know. Maybe you lost power. I did not. At any rate, we'll pick up on Friday. With Thoreau, today I'm going to talk to you about economy. The chapter that we started, or at least I introduced to you on Monday. And then we'll continue with the assigned readings, where I lived and what I lived for, etc. for Friday. I might cut one or two of those out, and if I do that, I will email you later this afternoon, okay? Please read the biographical material on page 950. It's good. Thoreau's life is interesting, as short as it is. I mentioned some highlights of his life to you last time. He works in his family's graphite factory. His mother runs a boarding house. He has tuberculosis. He graduates from Harvard in 1837 in the middle of an economic crisis, but quits his fairly good-paying job as a school teacher when he's required to beat the children when they misbehave. And that tells you a lot about Thoreau. He moves home. He's in Concord. Is very closely associated with Emerson. He's part of the Transcendentalist Circle. He edits the Dial, which is the magazine of this group of Transcendentalists for a while. Makes some money off his writing. Probably the most lucrative thing that Thoreau does is work as a surveyor in and around Concord. And he makes some money lecturing as well, but he doesn't really hold a steady job per se. The land on which he lives in his Walden experiment is owned by the Emerson family. That tells you a lot about how close he was to the Emersons. He never marries, dies of tuberculosis at age 44. Thoreau was not a super successful writer in his own day. One of his books, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, sells something like 300 copies, is kind of a disappointment to him. But Walden does sell out. All 1,000 copies of the initial run sell out, and in fact, Walden has not been out of print since it was first published in 1854, and that's significant. Walden is probably Thoreau's best known work, probably his most influential writing, as Jolie reminded us last time, is Civil Disobedience, which we'll read later in the semester. But Walden is a really influential text. It's his reputation, and it's really the basis of Thoreau's reputation today. He certainly, at least in the popular imagination and popular culture, Thoreau's influence is much wider spread than Emerson's, I think, much as I love and prefer Emerson. But Thoreau and Walden has influenced politicians, writers, naturalists, and average people to a really pretty profound degree. He's had a big cultural stamp. So that said, I want to caution you against the mistake that readers often make in thinking that Thoreau is telling everyone to go and do exactly what he did and live in a cabin in the woods somewhere. Thoreau is not urging you to do that. What he's urging you to do is live a life that is authentic to whoever you are, to be awake, to be conscious of the world, to make choices because they are true to you and not because other people are telling you to do them. As he writes in the middle of the second paragraph of Walden, the second paragraph of the entire book, page 970 of your text, he says, "As for the rest of my readers, they will accept such portions of Walden as apply to them. I trust that none will stretch the seams in putting on the coat," in reading my book, the metaphor of reading as putting on the coat, "for it may do good service to him whom it fits." In other words, take from this what you will, and I hope it will do you good, right? Not saying do as I tell you to do. That is antithetical to the entire transcendentalist experience, right? Transcendentalism is about doing what is right for you, not doing it because someone else tells you to do it, right? Okay, so to economy. So I'm going to give you about 8 points that I think are the most important things for you to know about economy. And we'll pick up our conversation, as I said, on Friday. So, point number 1. First thing he does in the beginning of the text is identify what he sees as the problem of contemporary American society. And what is that problem? Man is driven, you and I are driven not by what is true to us and what we want to do, but we're driven by our labor, by whatever our occupation is, and not by our own desires and values and passions. As a result, Thoreau writes on page 973, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. From the desperate city you go into the desperate country and have to console yourself with the bravery of minks and muskrats. So we're miserable. We're working too hard, and we're working too hard at the wrong things. That is point number one. Point number two, there's another way to live. I'm gonna tell you about an alternative life, an alternative economy or way to live. And he's going to pun on that throughout this first chapter. And I'll talk more about this in a second, about the language of business. That there is a whole other world of business that is not about getting and spending, and that is more important and more meaningful. So, that second point, exploring an alternative way to live. So he sets up a set of fairly complex metaphors around clothing, shelter, food, and fuel. He calls them the things that are necessary for life. And when you take care of these necessities for life, which are also metaphors for other things, then you can flourish and flower. All right? Fuel, for example, here, he means both physical warmth, but he also means intellectual or spiritual heat or fire. So that was point number two, the necessary things that you need to live, the alternative economy. Third point that I think is important. Why should we live differently? Why is it necessary for us to change? Well, first of all, because as I noted above, because we're unhappy, we're miserable. If you look around, most of the people who live the way we live are not satisfied with their life. But also because there is a real and meaningful alternative to this. We don't need to live this way. And so, as he writes on page 976, the middle of the page, no, I'm sorry, it's at the bottom of the page, 976. To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school, but so to love wisdom as to live according to its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically. Right? So living, as he suggests we live, should be an enactment of wisdom, right? There is a better way to be in the world. And don't we all want to live as well as possible, right? So that's our third point. Point number 4. Pay attention, please, to the language, as I mentioned a minute ago, the language of business and commerce. Throughout this chapter, he puns on the language of business. He offers you a different language of economy and a different way of living and earning your way in the world. So on page 980, for example, he writes, I have thought that Walden Pond would be a good place for business. It is a good port and a good foundation. Well, if you've been to Walden Pond, the idea of Walden as a port is kind of hilarious. I mean, it's a little pond in the New England woods. But what he means is that a real life of business and economy and expansion is lived small. It's lived on your own terms. And the real business is thinking about the business of life, the entire human enterprise. And he's going to offer us a new economy or a new way to live. So that's our fourth point. Fifth point. Walden is always urging us to seek a meaningful freedom for ourselves, to place the good of the individual above everything. And we find that freedom Thoreau argues, through simplicity. Simplicity is one of the most charged and important words in all of Walden. On page 989, bottom of the page, Thoreau writes, "Before we can adorn our houses with beautiful objects, the walls must be stripped, and our lives must be stripped, and beautiful housekeeping and beautiful living be laid for a foundation. Now, a taste for the beautiful is most cultivated out of doors, where there is no house and no housekeeper." So, if the house is my life, speaking metaphorically, we've got to strip our life of all the extraneous and unnecessary stuff in order to live beautifully and simply. And we have to strip away this extra stuff because we've allowed, as he says further up on page 989, we've allowed ourselves to become the tools of our tools, right? Think about the way your phone rules your life, right? And we need to strip all that stuff away in order to really know who we are and lead a life that is meaningful to us. Point number 6, Thoreau has some very pointed ideas about education. I would just steer you to page 996 and ask you to spend some time there, paying attention to his ideas about education. Shorthand is we learn more by doing than by having other people do for us or reading about other people doing. Point number 7, friendship and society. Like Emerson, Thoreau is very anxious about society and the influence of society. Again, like Emerson, he loves people and values friendship, but ultimately he's always going to argue that the solitary dwelling, living alone, is best because other people are going to pull you down and away from what you really care about. As he writes on page 1007, "The only cooperation which is commonly possible is exceedingly partial and superficial. To cooperate in the highest as well as the lowest sense means to get our living together. Above all, as I have implied, the man who goes alone can start today, but he who travels with another must wait till that other is ready, and it may be a long time before they go off." Right? So when we attach ourselves too closely to other people, we lose track of what's important and we cannot pursue the thing that is most important to us. Last point. Students are often shocked by what Thoreau has to say about charity and philanthropy. Thoreau is really repulsed by people who do what is commonly thought of as good without being good themselves. He has a lot to say about what goodness is, in fact. So what he means is that the giving of money to charity is a kind of easy and often meaningless way to feel like you're doing something better for other people, and so you feel better, but you're actually maybe even hurting other people while you, in the meantime, are kind of rotten and not the best person that you could be. So he says on page 1009, "There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root. Right? And it may be that he who bestows the largest amount of time and money on the needy is doing the most by his mode of life to produce that misery which he strives in vain to relieve." In other words, he who claims to be doing the most to help other people may, by the way he lives his life, be causing the most damage. But because you haven't reflected on your own mode of life, you're not aware of the damage that you're causing, right? Some, he says, show their kindness to the poor by employing them in their kitchens. Would they not be kinder if they employed themselves there? In other words, take care of your own mess. Be a good person before you think you can go out and help other people. All right, so please give these ideas some thought. Spend some more time with Walden if you haven't completed the assigned readings. We'll pick up on Friday where I lived and what I lived for, and I'll be in touch with you shortly about additional reading for Friday. So just to recap, the points that I think are most important here: the problem of modern society, an alternative way to live, how to live differently, the language of business and commerce, the importance of individual freedom, right kind of education, friendship and society, and his ideas about charity and philanthropy. All right, see you Friday.